Hello and welcome. This video is going to explore No One Lives Forever, a forgotten FPS masterpiece. What if I told you that one of the greatest first-person shooters ever made is also one of the only legendary games you can't legally buy? There's no Steam release, there's no modern remaster, and perhaps most bizarrely of all, nobody really seems to know who actually owns the rights. The Operative, No One Lives Forever, is one of gaming's strangest success stories. It released in 2000. It mixed James Bond-style espionage, razor-sharp comedy, groundbreaking AI, and surprisingly deep stealth mechanics years before games like Dishonored, Hitman, or Deus Ex Human Revolution would make those ideas mainstream. It was funny without being childish, action-packed without sacrificing strategy, and technically, it was years ahead of its competition. Yet despite critical acclaim and an incredibly loyal fan base, the series has effectively vanished from history because of one of the most confusing copyright situations in gaming. Today, the Button Mash Bros are looking back at how Monolith Productions created one of the smartest shooters of its generation and why it still holds up more than 2 decades later. This is No One Lives Forever. It was a different kind of shooter. In the year 2000, first-person shooters were exploding in popularity. Half-Life had shown the genre could tell compelling stories. Quake 3 Arena and Unreal Tournament pushing multiplayer to new heights. Deus Ex would arrive later the same year with RPG mechanics and far more player choice than ever before. But almost every shooter had one thing in common: they took themselves very seriously. They were all around things like military operations, alien invasion, secret laboratories, demons from hell, quite formulaic. Then along came a game starring a witty British super spy who defeated villains with exploding perfume bottles and poisoned lipstick. It shouldn't have worked. Instead, it became one of the genre's freshest ideas. The game introduced you to Cate Archer, the super spy in the 60s. The project was developed by Monolith Productions, a studio already respected for pushing technical boundaries, and by 2000 Monolith had earned a reputation through games like Blood and Shogo, Mobile Armor Division showing fast action and impressive technology. The team then wanted to build something completely different. Rather than risk another dark sci-fi shooter, they imagined a glamorous world inspired by the films of the 1960s. It was a bit of a parody, but not a clone. A genuine love letter to an entire era. And that was Cate Archer. Unlike many action heroes of the late 1990s, Cate wasn't a muscle-bound soldier or a silent protagonist. She was intelligent, observant, professional, and confident without being invincible. In many ways, she felt refreshing even then, and remarkably modern today. Originally overlooked within the fictional espionage agency known as Unity, Cate finds herself thrust into the center of an international conspiracy after veteran agents begin mysteriously disappearing. It's a classic underdog story wrapped inside a globe-trotting spy adventure. From the very beginning, Monolith embraced the style of 1960s spy fiction. You can immediately see the influence of James Bond films like Goldfinger and Thunderball, the colourful title cards, the lounge-inspired soundtrack, the exotic locations, and the frankly ridiculous villains. Even the gadgets feel like they belong inside Q Branch. But because securing the James Bond license would have been practically impossible or very expensive, the developers instead created an entirely different universe. The freedom proved invaluable. Without being tied to existing characters or expectations, monoliths can take bigger and more creative risks. The villains became stranger, the humour was sharper, and the missions were more inventive, but not going over into the realms of being ludicrous. Instead of merely copying Bond, they celebrated the entire spy genre. The result feels familiar without being derivative. It's worth noting, of course, at the time, and perhaps still today, a female hero lead was very uncommon. Looking back, it's easy to forget how unusual Cate Archer really was. The late 1990s certainly had female protagonists. Everybody knows Lara Croft. But many were marketed primarily through exaggerated character designs rather than personality. Cate Archer was different. Her writing is what carries the game. She's sarcastic, she's resourceful, she's competent, she's funny, she's often the smartest person in the room. Importantly, the story highlights how she faces sexism within Unity, the agency that she works for itself. Senior agents consistently underestimate her and talk down to her. Colleagues dismiss her abilities, and yet every mission you prove them wrong again and again and again. Rather than simply telling players she's capable, the game lets her, you, demonstrate it. For a shooter released in 2000, that was surprisingly nuanced. Of course, style alone wasn't enough. The technology had to keep up. Monolith built the game using its own Lithtech engine, one of the more versatile engines of the era. Unlike many competitors, Lithtech excelled at creating large indoor environments filled with detailed architecture, luxury hotels, snow-covered military installations, underwater laboratories, secret volcano bases. The engine handled lighting and animation surprisingly well. The engine handled lighting, animation, and surprisingly advanced scripting exceptionally well. Character models featured expressive facial animations, which were uncommon at the time. Weapons had satisfying feedback, large environments streamed smoothly, and the levels felt believable because they weren't just corridors leading to the next firefight. Instead, it feels like you're in a real location with multiple routes and believable layouts. There are lots of bright colours, very retro furniture, bold architecture. It's a pretty timeless aesthetic that avoids feeling dated. Monolith didn't want players to feel like soldiers, they wanted you to feel like a spy. The single design philosophy influenced nearly every decision. Combat wasn't always the best answer. Listening to conversation often reveals useful information that you can use to bypass dangerous encounters, and even though disguises aren't available, planning mattered. Every mission attempted to capture the feeling of starring in your own spy film. Some levels focused on infiltration, others became explosive action spectacles. There was something in there for everyone. And just when you thought you'd seen everything, the game would suddenly introduce a motorcycle chase, or underwater dive into a crashed submarine, or an elaborate villain's headquarters, or a mission to take you to space. The constant variety in No One Lives Forever is one of its greatest strengths. You never quite know what the next mission is going to ask you to do, and in an era where many shooters repeated the same mechanics from beginning to end, that felt pretty unpredictable, pretty revolutionary too. Once No One Lived Forever finally launched in September 2000, critics quickly realized Monolith are creating something special. The flashy gadgets and the stylish presentation weren't truly what set the game apart. Enemies could hear you. The AI was better than anything that had been produced before. They'd investigate suspicious activity, they'd call for help, they'd hold conversations that helped you and told you information about them, but sometimes were just funny. And sometimes they were so entertaining, players deliberately delayed missions just to listen to them. Certainly that's a memory that I have, playing the game from all the way from the early 2000s to the late 2010s. The groundbreaking AI and the gameplay built around it is where No One Lived Forever truly earned its legendary reputation. Following its release, the reviews praised its humour, its style, its presentation, but beneath the swinging 60s aesthetic was a shooter packed with ideas that many games wouldn't fully embrace for years. Monolith's AI really was groundbreaking. It's a feature that makes No One Lives Forever stand out, and it's something that means that you can still play it today and it can be enjoyable. When many FPS shooters had AI enemies that simply stood in place until they spotted the player, Monolith's guards behaved in, at the time, surprisingly believable ways. If they heard footsteps, they investigated. If they saw the light from your belt buckle or belt torch, they investigated. If they discovered the bodies left behind, they raised the alarm without seeing you. If gunfire erupted nearby, they call for reinforcements. They work together, they flank, they take cover, and they react to changing situations rather than blindly following scripted routines. Today those features sound standard, although not every game gets them right, but back then they were anything but. The AI created tension because players could never be entirely certain how guards would respond. It meant if you played a level again, you wouldn't get entirely the same outcome, and because there's more than one way to approach most missions, the game had high replayability value. The first time you might try a stealth approach, the second time you might get caught or a body might be spotted and trigger a facility-wide firefight. The unpredictability makes stealth rewarding and genuinely exciting. In a slightly fun, maybe slightly ironic way, I think what most fans remember about the AI has nothing to do with the combat. Really, it's the conversations between some of the guards or other characters that you encounter. Instead of standing silent in their post, they often chat with one another. They complained about terrible working conditions. They discuss holiday plans. Some debate food, others worried about their careers. They gossip, they joke, they argue, and they make you laugh. The conversations often serve almost no gameplay purpose, but they transformed anonymous enemies into believable people. Players often found themselves hiding behind a crate simply to hear the rest of the conversation. The writing was genuinely funny, and because dialogue changed throughout the game, these moments rarely became repetitive. It also helped sell the illusion these villains actually lived inside their elaborate bases instead of solely existing for you to shoot. The level of environmental storytelling was remarkably uncommon in first-person shooters of the time, and is still something we look back on fondly. Unlike dedicated stealth games such as Thief, which often punish players for being detected, No One Lives Forever strikes a careful balance. Getting spotted isn't an automatic failure, it just changes the situation that you're in. Quiet infiltration could become a frantic gun battle. Players could recover from mistakes instead of restarting the mission and then continue with their stealth run. The flexibility made stealth approachable for players who weren't necessarily experts, and that was definitely me when I was 7 years old playing this for the first time. It also means, as I said before, missions feel more dynamic. The game reacts to the way you play. No two playthroughs really unfold exactly the same way. Sometimes everything went according to plan. Sometimes it went spectacularly wrong. Both outcomes were equally entertaining. Of course, where would a spy be without gadgets? This is where No One Lives Forever truly embraces its inspiration. Rather than filling Cate Archer's inventory with conventional military equipment, Monolith equipped her with an arsenal of wonderfully ridiculous spy technology. Do you need to distract a guard? Throw a robotic poodle? Need to incapacitate somebody quietly? You could use a gas disguised in a perfume bottle. Need to pick a lock? Kate's hairpin could be used for that, doubling up as a poison delivery system in case you run out of ammunition. If you need to weld a lock open, then your trusty cigarette lighter can be configured to be a small welder to break through those things. There were explosive lipsticks, camera devices that covered them up, allowing you to move past cameras silently without being noticed, listening bugs, sleeping gas, explosive hidden tools, many of them disguised as everyday items that you would expect somebody to have on them. Kate's belt buckle doubled up as a line launcher, allowing her to travel vast distances later on in the game. Some of the gadgets weren't mandatory. You could ignore them entirely and just play the game as a first-person shooter, but experimenting with them often revealed creative or hilarious solutions to encounters. They also reinforced the fantasy of being an international super spy rather than just some sort of commando unit blasting your way through the game. The weapons felt different too. When violence became unavoidable, or perhaps if you just chose to run into the game guns blazing, the arsenal remained surprisingly varied. Silenced pistol rewarded careful aim, submachine guns excelled during frantic firefights, and sniper rifles encouraged patience. Every weapon had a distinct purpose without overwhelming players with unnecessary complexity, but more importantly, switching between them felt seamless. One moment you were silently disabling alarms, the next you were escaping through exploding corridors while firing an assault rifle. The balance between stealth and action became one of the game's defining strengths. Technically speaking, No One Lives Forever was impressive and is a great showcase for Monolith's Lithtech engine. Character animation was expressive, lighting created believable atmosphere, large interiors, as I mentioned before, included huge amounts of detail. But the greatest visual achievement probably isn't the graphic fidelity, which, if we're honest, doesn't really hold up today. It was the artistic direction, embracing bold optimism of the 1960s. The hotels glowed with polished wood and vibrant colours. Secret laboratories looked straight out of a classic spy cinema. Snow-covered military bases contrasted beautifully against icy landscapes, and every location has a clear and distinct identity of its own. Rather than chasing realism, Monolith leaned heavily into stylized design. The decision has allowed the game to age, generally, remarkably well. Whilst some technical limitations are obvious today, the art direction still carries the enormous personality the game has. It's proof that strong visual design often outlasts cutting-edge technology. In terms of sound design and music, the presentation of the game extended well beyond the visuals. Composer Guy Whitmore created a soundtrack overflowing with jazz influences, orchestral spy themes, and upbeat lounge music. Every mission felt like the opening act of a classic espionage film. The music shifted naturally between quiet infiltration and high-octane action, enhancing tension without ever overwhelming you, the player. Voice acting is another standout, particularly Cate Archer's dry wit, which makes her instantly likable, and the game's villains delivered delightfully theatrical performances. Even background characters are often memorable thanks to sharp writing and excellent comedic timing. The combination of music, dialogue, and sound effects gives the game a level of polish that rivals many big budget productions, and we would argue even today. The game takes place during the late 60s, a world where international espionage is as glamorous as it is dangerous. You step into the role of Cate Archer, a former cat burglar turned elite operative for Unity, an international intelligence agency dedicated to protecting the world from global threats. Despite proving yourself repeatedly, Cate, as I mentioned before, discovers many of her fellows don't really respect her. She is often given the least glamorous jobs, ignored during important briefings, and dismissed by her senior operatives who believe she's too inexperienced to really be of any help. After all of those field agents disappear, Cate suddenly becomes the only real operative left, and therefore is thrust into the action of the game. What begins as a simple investigation soon uncovers a conspiracy that stretches across the entire globe. Assassinations kick off the story, but soon you're led into a world of advanced weapon technology, international terrorism, rocket launches, zero-G environments in space, and an enemy organization with ambitions far greater than anyone imagines. It's a story filled with twists, but it never becomes difficult to follow. Me and my brother enjoyed this game when we were not even 10 years old and still enjoy it today. Instead of drowning players in complex political intrigue, Monolith focuses on entertaining characters and constant momentum. It always feels like you're in the next chapter in a classic spy novel. And then we have the villains. H.A.R.M. Every great spy needs an equally memorable enemy. For Cate Archer, that's H.A.R.M, clearly inspired by James Bond's Spectre. However, H.A.R.M, or Hierarchical Alliance for the Restoration of Mediocrity, tells you everything you need to know about the game's sense of humour. Rather than creating realistic terrorists, Monolith embrace a larger-than-life style supervillain. Every senior member of H.A.R.M feels like someone who could have stepped straight out of a 1960s Bond film. They're either ridiculous or dangerous, ludicrous, humorous, but believable enough to keep the stakes real whilst you play. The organization itself is operated from elaborate secret bases scattered around the world to above it, hidden laboratories, missile silos, luxury headquarters. Every location becomes another playground for your increasingly dangerous missions. Some of the most memorable villains include Baroness Dumas. She's elegant, she's cruel, and she's convinced of her own superiority. She embodies the sophisticated theatrical style that defines H.A.R.M. Rather than shouting every line, she often speaks calmly, making her feel more intimidating. Her confrontations with Cate become verbal duels as much as physical ones, and the chemistry between the hero and villain helps elevate the campaign. Then there's Sergeant Magnus Armstrong, H.A.R.M.'s Scottish heavy, towering, intimidating, and consistently funny. He's the kind of villain who's clearly enjoying his work, but we enjoy his presence too. Every appearance raises the tension, but often his dialogue creates some of the game's biggest laughs. Monolith understood their memorable villains aren't simply powerful, they need to be entertaining. One of the other standouts is, of course, Dmitry Volkov, whose cold professionalism contrasts sharply with the more theatrical members of H.A.R.M. Rather than chewing the scenery, Volkov represents the calculated efficiency behind the organization's operations. Together, these personalities ensure H.A.R.M never feels like a faceless enemy, quite the contrary. Each senior member leaves a lasting impression throughout the entirety of the game. We've outlined earlier that the series at this point is effectively dead. That didn't happen overnight. 2 years after the game released, Monolith released a sequel, No One Lives Forever 2, A Spy in Harm's Way. Rather than simply repeating the first game, the sequel refined almost everything. There was a substantial graphics upgrade, the AI was far more reactive, the stealth systems were definitely expanded. and mission design was far more open-ended. Gadgets were more inventive, and Cate Archer herself became an even stronger protagonist. Many fans often debate which game is better. We certainly think the first one, but that's not to take away from the second. It's still a great game and definitely worth exploring. Either way, the fact that discussion exists more than 20 years later says everything you need to know about the quality of both. Unfortunately, the series' momentum wouldn't last. Following this 2002 sequel, Monolith released Contract Jack in 2003. Rather than starring Cate Archer, players took control of John Jack, a supporting character from the main series. Although the game featured enjoyable action, it largely abandoned the espionage that made No One Lives Forever unique. Reviews were respectable, but noticeably less enthusiastic than that of its predecessors, and at this point Monolith itself was changing. The studio was soon shift its focus towards new projects, including Fear in 2005, another title that became famous for groundbreaking AI. Cate Archer quietly disappeared from the spotlight, and no third main entry was ever announced. And then the real mystery began. What follows is a complicated and frankly silly copyright puzzle. Normally, when a beloved game becomes difficult to find, the solution is fairly straightforward. There is a publisher who owns the rights. Fans often create enough drive for the publisher to want to remaster it. Perhaps they don't. No One Lives Forever doesn't seem to be that simple. Over the years, the ownership of the franchise has become tangled in a complicated web of mergers, acquisitions, and corporate restructurings. Monolith itself was acquired by Warner Brothers. The original publisher, Fox Interactive, changed hands several times before eventually becoming part of Activision through a chain of acquisitions involving Vivendi. Different companies appear to hold different pieces of the copyright puzzle. Some may have owned publishing rights, others have got trademarks, some others held parts of the underlying intellectual property or some of the source code. The problem is, it is still unclear today who owns what. And as lawyers don't seem to be able to disentangle that, no company is able to willingly publicly state that they hold complete uncontested ownership of the franchise. And as a result, it's locked in limbo. It seems unlikely we'll ever see another No One Lives Forever game, and it's difficult to get hold of online. Fans have created a updated version of the game, or first two games that you can download online for free. But no published game has existed since the early 2000s, and it's hard to get hold of a copy online, particularly because, of course, you need a disk drive, and obviously most computers don't have one. No One Lives Forever is a great game. If you got time to download a game that might take you 10 to 15 hours to play, and you're happy just to leisurely go through a game from the early 2000s that has great writing, funny writing, great set pieces, inventive character design and inventive gadgets, and is a little slice of quality history, it's worth seeing if you can get hold of a copy of this. It's a game about spies and secret organizations and hidden identities and conspiracies. And yes, it's just as mysterious now as the story it tells, thanks to the ridiculous laws it's found itself tied up in. But honestly, more than 25 years later, it remains one of PC gaming's finest hidden gems, not because it was forgotten, but because of circumstances outside the developer's control, preventing new generations from discovering it. We hope that one day these legal questions surrounding the series will be finally answered, and hopefully Cate Archer will return, because great games deserve to be played, and she deserves a better and more fitting end than to be locked up in a legal battle between multiple companies. If you've never experienced No One Lives Forever, hopefully this retrospective has shown why so many PC gamers still talk about it with affection. And if you were lucky enough to play it back in the early 2000s, we'd love to see some comments below saying what your favourite parts of the game are. Thank you for listening to this video. It's something we've been wanting to make for a long time, and is one of the reasons we started the channel in the first place. Until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
The girl's in the lobby. Kill her!
But why didn't you kill her, Mr. Volkov?
I meant to, but my hunger for revenge distracted me. Let that be a lesson not to be ruled by your emotions.
Excellent advice, sir. Well, I'll go shoot her now.
Make sure there are no witnesses.
You mean we should kill everybody?
First, kill everybody. Then destroy the hotel. Let our enemies search the rubble for answers. They shall find none.